We were really intentional in a small space that we were rooted in love. Bell Hook's writings about teaching to transgress or teaching community and her work that love is the revolutionary act. By being clear with people, by giving people feedback, even about their reaction to something, is a demonstration of love.
This is the Engaging Leadership Show where we uncover the stories and strategies behind successful educational leadership. Is there a way to bring innovation to large schools to be able to drive change quickly using leadership principles that are almost universal? Communication, being able to be clear about decision making, being vulnerable and being human. Today's guest is going to be walking us through her experience across the country from living in the East Coast and working across the West Coast and the Midwest, and how she's now applying everything that she's learned as a leader to being able to bring her team along with her in a large high school out in California. Stay tuned for more on the Engaging Leadership Show. Today's guest grew up in New Jersey. She was an undergraduate at University of Michigan and earned her master's at the University of Colorado. She was a high school principal for 2 Bay Area charter schools, and while she was in San Francisco, she has led a school with the highest graduation and lowest dropout rates in the city. I'm so excited for today's conversation, and we have in our studios today Beth Silbergeld. She's the principal of Branham High School in San Jose, California. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, CT.
So, Beth, tell us a little bit more about your school. What's the community like at Branham High, and how are the students like?
Great. So we are the Bruins at Branham. We are part of the Campbell Union High School District. So it is a district of 6 high schools, which is unique. I think being in a district that is solely made up of high schools means that we can collaborate together, learn from each other, and yet every school is really unique in the district. We're also great rivals of each other and pushing each other. I think iron sharpens iron, pushing each other to be the sharpest, have excellence academically and socio-emotionally in the work that we do, and of course, athletics and our band and arts programs. So Branham is generally in the south part of San Jose. Is a really big city, one that I've only lived in for 4 years. So some might argue that we're not in the south if they've been here longer than me. To me, it's more south than where I was working in the past. We have about 1,850 students. We have a staff of over 100 people, and our student community is really diverse. It's diverse racially and ethically and socioeconomically. And then, of course, the diversity that just comes with being a teenager. There's just so many different types of kids here. We have over 99 clubs that are seeking to engage students in things that they feel passionate about, and a really large range of academic offerings as well.
99 clubs. It sounds like you guys have a limit of like 100.
Yeah, I also think some clubs come and go. I think because of the drive for students to be innovative and to have things that they want to say that they started and led, there's a very detailed process for how to start a club and maybe a less detailed club for how to close one out.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned you guys are the Bruins, like the Bears?
Yeah, we're the Bears. I know there is an important university down in LA that's also the Bruins. We do have some alumni that to brag about that. But our motto is paws up. So you'll see kids in their photos doing that, and also something that we'll put at the end of a meeting or the end of an email is not only a defensive stance, but also one that brings us together, that we stand together in that way.
You mentioned the competition with other high schools in San Jose. I love that. I'm all for school-on-school competition. What are some of the areas that the Bruins has been dominating?
We dominated last night in a boys volleyball game against our biggest rival, the Lee Longhorns. We had less success in some of our other sports areas. Right now, our tennis team is making their way towards the BVAL competition, which is the league. And then from there, they'll go to CCS. We have an incredible cheer squad that our stunt cheer is going to advance to CCS. Our Royal Alliance Marching Band is incredible, and they're always at the top of their brackets, so to speak, and their performances that they're doing. So those are just some of few of the ways that our kids kind of show up and show out.
Very cool. Um, and we were talking before this, and one of the things that interested me in our conversation was that you went from being a principal of a relatively smaller school and you drove a lot of innovation in that school. And now you're a principal in a kind of mid to large sized high school. What have you felt any differences in that move? How is that panning out for you?
I think that I'm going to say two things that sound like they're total opposites, but in the spirit of both things can be true. There's incredible differences between a small school, a small that is 400 students and less, just because of the nature of how communities are built and the closeness that can come out of being in a smaller school. But at the same time, school is school. There's certain number of hours that people are on site. There's a range of different personalities that are present, whether the student community, staff community, parent community, your larger stakeholders of the board and the community at large. So I think that the transition from being in small schools to being in the two large comprehensive high schools that I worked in the past 2 years hasn't been that challenging. And I think another piece is that we're so steeped as educators in our own schooling experience. I grew up in a town called Westfield, New Jersey, and went to a school that at the time had about 1,400 students. So I had come from the large school experience. So when I was working in a small school by design, which was Leadership High School in San Francisco, where I started my teaching and leadership journey, I always was aware of wanting to make sure that we were having the spirit as much as we could of a large comprehensive in that smaller space. But at the same time, that was a space that was intentionally created to not be a traditional high school experience. And of course, the city of San Francisco is much different than suburban New Jersey. So already it's going to be radically different and have a very unique stamp on it.
Yeah, your own journey is really interesting because you have traveled pretty much across the country. You grew up on the East Coast, you did your undergrad kind of Midwest, and then you're in Colorado, and then now you're here on the West Coast. And you've also done like smaller schools, larger schools. Like, what are some of the things that you feel from a student psychology, student development perspective? Have you seen any commonalities? And what are some of the differences that you've seen?
The biggest framework that guided my development as a teacher and a teacher leader, and then ultimately an administrator, was being in a school that rested on the Coalition of Essential Schools principles. So the Coalition of Essential Schools was started by Deborah Meyer and Ted Sizer on the East Coast. And then there were schools across the country that used those principles to design different schools for children. And of course, it looked different depending on what the community looked like or what the focus and passion of the people in the schools looked like. But the guiding principle that really stuck with me was in a small place, making sure that every child was known well by at least one adult. So in a small school where you can have a program of advisory, which was really common in a lot of the coalition schools and what we really excelled at in San Francisco at leadership, really ensured that there was an adult that ideally would be with that student and their family for the 4 years that they were in high school. And they might not have been their favorite adult. So just when you assign an adult to a student, it is the structure, but it meant that person was paying attention to their graduation requirements, that they were teaching them essential skills of how to be a scholar, that they were looking out for their socio-emotional needs, and also helping them work through creating their portfolio and doing a performance assessment. So in a large school, those structures are not able to be easily transferable. We're not doing portfolio and exhibitions for a graduation requirement in a large school. A teacher might have a math portfolio, for example, to demonstrate mastery towards outcomes, but it's not the foundation of the school. I think even the belief of every child being known well by at least one adult think the counseling model is a way that looks different in a large high school. The counseling ratios are different from school to school. There has to be an intentionality of the district to make sure that those counts are ideally 200 and lower. But even within those 200 students, some students might connect more to that counselor. Or again, some students need more attention than others, and some students need less attention. But I do think that idea of every child being known well by one adult is something to carry from the small schools movement from coalition schools to the large school model, the framework. A huge difference between small schools and large schools is that at small schools, we are generalists. Maybe that's the advisor mindset also, is that you're an advisory teacher and you are a teacher of your subject matter. You might be teaching, you're definitely teaching multiple preps like teachers are in most contexts, but you have a more robust knowledge also of the school. I think we talked about always wearing multiple hats. And in a large school, you're not talking about wearing multiple hats. You are honoring those who are specialists, whether they're content specialists or they are wellness specialists. And the danger of the specialist is to make sure that folks don't become siloed. Folks will become siloed in either context if they want to be, but it's the job of the leader and the job of teachers to push back against those silos, to be intentional about creating community. And sometimes I think in a large school, those communities are linking smaller ones together. And whereas in a small school under 400, there's no way that you can just connect with the people in your department because your department might only be 2 or 3 people.
Yeah, those are great points. And as you were talking, it just reminds me of this idea of the Dunbar number. It's basically just like the limits of deep human interaction can only be about 150 people. That in structures across human organizations. And it sounds like exactly what you said. I want to pull on that thread. In a larger school, it's really about building a community of communities. You have a lot of small communities that you need to foster and encourage and grow. And your job in the larger schools maybe to tie all of them together with some kind of connective tissue. And it also brought to mind your first point around the counseling model, where you might have one adult to say 150 to 200. But even then, that's a large number for a counselor to be on top of their portfolio work, on top of their college prep, and on top of their admissions packages and all of that. Do you feel like in a large school, there's a need to have other things in place to, not to say compensate for, but to balance out the fact that every child may not be known well by one adult?
There's definitely a need for it, but I also want to name going from schools that have been more urban or in a more inner city area to a more suburban place. I do have a wondering if their needs might be less because they are coming with potentially more parent support. I've gone from spaces where we really needed to celebrate and work on making sure that our first generation's college students knew how those pathways to get there. In the community that I'm in now, that's a smaller segment of students that are going to be first gen, whereas larger population is students that are probably second and third generation going to college. I do think that one of those ways that we do compensate for maybe not every child being known well, but at least is the student life part of the school. So if students see themselves as a Bruin because they are excited about Spirit Weeks or they're part of the Battle of the Classes, BOTC week that's happening right now, then they're more connected to each other and connected to the idea of the school. In the smaller school setting where there's not Friday night football games or there's not the huge array of offerings that link students to being on a team or having a coach or having a mentor or even having a stronger friend group that they can connect to, then it's the small schools that really put the demand in a lot of ways on the emotional connectivity and the functional connectivity to an adult.
Got it. That makes sense. One of the other things that we spoke about was the ability to innovate in a smaller context, trying out new things, trying out different ways of instruction, different ways of class organization, different schedules, versus in a larger school context, every change requires a lot more effort. And that becomes like a more of a challenge of leadership and more of like a balancing act between innovation and at the same time being respectful of things that have worked in a large context. Like, how have you experienced this and navigated that?
Yeah, when I started, I was in San Leandro last year at San Leandro High School. And I had a colleague that I'd worked in a small school with before I got there. And she said, I need to tell you that you're going to be frustrated with how slow change happens or how slow things move. You mentioned effort, right, as the driver of change or the driver of things happening. What process are you going to use and what's the structure in place? And in a larger system, there's a lot more people that ideas need to move through and to get approval for and possibly to take a risk on. There are contractual agreements that we need to be aware of before we make decisions that are going to tumble. Last year, Branham teachers changed the bell schedule. There's a committee that those processes are outlined in the CBA, when it's going to meet and when those proposals are going to make. And that change of the bell schedule has had broad impact on students. We were able to build in a 30-minute tutorial to the school day. They're mandated to go, it's instructional minutes that they're spending 30 minutes in a class of their choice to get extra support. So as part of an MTSS model, they're getting the possibility for an intervention because it also depends on what the teacher is going to do with that time. Our bell schedule at leadership changed nearly every year because folks would talk about it and then we would have ideas about it. Of course, we had to make sure that our instructional minutes were accounted for. And usually with that, we were moving advisory around. Where is advisory the best place to be? What is going to be the best schedule that gets students to the school on time more often? Because in a school that is a Title I school, depending on how you're funded, if you're an ADA funded school, you're going to have to really make sure that you're paying a lot of attention in your bell schedule that's going to get your highest attendance. And in a school that isn't being funded that way, then you're not using that as your main driver of innovation. Those aren't really innovative and exciting to talk about, but there's certainly changes that have tumble down effects on other things. I even think the other piece is, how are those decisions being made? So in a large school with a strong union, those decisions might be dictated in the CBA, whereas other decisions that I'm making, regardless of what community that I'm in, I'm really, really clear and transparent about, this is the decision that needs to be made. This is how we're going to make it. And this is how you'll learn about it. Are we using consensus? Or am I gathering input and then I'm going to ultimately make the decision for you? Or are we going to go for a majority vote on something? And educators make more decisions than airline pilots on a daily basis. So decision making is tiring and requires a lot of energy, but that decision making is another aspect of how we drive innovation and change in schools.
Yeah, I like to double click on that point about decision making, particularly in a larger school. Like I can imagine there's just a lot of big and small decisions that come to your table every day. And it's not always easy to be able to communicate what you said. Like upfront, this category of decisions is going to be made by just you. And then this category of decisions, I'm going to get input. This category of decisions is going to be majority vote. In my experience is things happen in the moment.
Yeah.
People don't always remember your rules. Like, how do you paint this out on a day-to-day basis such that the staff members know, the teachers know what to do, and how to work with your decision-making frameworks on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. In best case scenarios, teachers don't have to worry about all the decisions that are being made because the teachers are busy making their own decisions about Do I go and help that student right now, or do I give them some space? Do I decide to reteach this concept right now, or do I keep moving forward knowing that 5 students in my class might not have yet got the content, right? Had some deep understanding. When a district or a school or a person is clear about the what and the main drivers for the school, what is it that we're working on? Are we working on aligning our curriculum and looking at a common assessment to determine where our teaching practice needs to improve to meet our students' needs? If that's been clear, then a decision about when that data review session or when that data analysis session is going to take place is really left up to the principal. Now, I can just speak. Yesterday, we had a data review session planned. The teachers were all ready. They had their sub plans ready. And then because it was a testing day for the CASP testing, we didn't have any subs. So I had to reschedule the session, tell the teachers, who then were like, when are we going to do it? And can we cancel it? And I had to be clear and say, we're not going to cancel it because the work is still important. The test was given. We need to look at the results. And I felt badly because they were stressed out, right? They expected to finish their class and then hand off their sub plans. And their day was different because of that. And for me, it was like, okay, I actually need to tell them, here's when we're going to do it. So automatically thinking, okay, how do I solve this problem so that they're not worried about it, but then also be clear, we're not going to stop the important work that we said that we were going to do because a rather small, but actually pretty predictable thing could have happened, which was we didn't have the availability of subs to do it.
That kind of makes sense. And from what I'm extracting from the anecdote you shared is there's going to be this big communication. This is how we make decisions broadly. But it sounds like for every decision that is made that has an impact on the people that are affected, you're taking the effort to explain the decision. And as a leader, not everyone's going to be happy with the decisions you make. And when you explain the decision, though, and you do that consistently, that communication then builds in an understanding of how you make decisions over time in a very visceral, experiential way, rather than here's the 3 rules of Beth, and then you put it out on your door and hope that people can make sense of it. You're explaining it in the moment every day. Am I like extracting too much from that?
No, I think that's right. I think it's providing people context and clarity of what happened, not necessarily going into the weeds about why, not looking to throw anybody under the bus, and certainly taking accountability if I missed something, but not over apologizing for that either. I think teachers need to give administrators grace in the same way that administrators need to give teachers grace and give kids grace. There are things that happen, right? And even last week, I had said, hey, I'm not sure that'll work out. Aren't you proctoring? But I didn't go to the next place of, wait a minute, we're not going to be able to have subs. And I think it goes back even to that piece about generalist versus specialist in some ways by explaining and not over explaining the larger system that impacted the smaller impact. Teaching, okay, be a generalist, put your hat on about all the different pieces that fed into the decision, in this case, of moving the session and the decision of not canceling it.
Yeah.
I
You know,
definitely have 3 rules. Not yet.
at the risk of putting you in a spot where you're going to have to say, oh, this is what we did in the past, and I'm going to move that over here because nobody likes to listen to that. But in your experience, this sounds like precisely the method of driving change and driving innovation as fast as you can in a larger context because you're constantly communicating and you're constantly problem solving almost with your teams of little things that crop up. And I like what you said, like that whole idea of grace. Like things are going to happen. People are going to get things wrong sometimes. As a leader, you're going to get things wrong. And it's really about how do you move forward? How do you keep that spirit of trying new things, being willing to fail, but at the same time, like putting guardrails such that your failure is not catastrophic. How have you thought about taking that mindset from before and applying it to today? And yeah, maybe just walking through like what you did before and then how that has evolved as you're in a different context today.
Yeah, I'm struck by your use of the word innovation and want to really think. I think the piece that's innovative or transformational is actually just about being intentional about school culture. And school culture, as with any business, culture is it's the iceberg. It's what's underneath the surface, driving what's happening above the surface. We were really intentional in a small space that we were rooted in love. Bell Hooks writings about teaching to transgress or teaching community and her work that love is the revolutionary act. By being clear with people, by giving people feedback, even about their reaction to something, is a demonstration of love. For me, I'm very visible. I'm very accessible to students, to parents, to teachers. I'm in the same place every single day at brunch and at lunch. So if someone needs to find me and they want to talk to me, they want to ask me a question, they want to tell me how they feel about something on this really big campus, there it's really easy to find me. And if I'm not there, there are people like some of my students that are going to come and make sure I'm at school and see what's happening because of the consistency around that. And administrators make all kinds of choices about how they spend their time and where they are and how much work we're doing in our offices and how much work we're doing after the students have left or in our homes. But having my door open when I am even working in my office, it says, come in. It says, actually, what's going on for you is really important to me. And if I can stop what I'm doing to show up for someone else, I'm going to do that. Now, you asked me, how did I bring that? Where did that come from? In a small school, it was easy. We were all everywhere. I didn't have to have one space where I was every single day because someone would know where I was. Oh, I just saw Silb. She's over there. Or students would just walk into our office, again, a very loving space, and find me if I was in my office. Or when I was a teacher, my door was always open. And even if a student was looking for me, that or someone in my advisory was looking for me, they knew that they could pop into the class, even if I was teaching biology. I think that covers that piece. Or
Okay,
something else I wanted to say about it.
got it. The other thing that we were talking about, and maybe related to this, is this whole idea of vulnerability and showing your
Mhm.
humanity as a leader. I really like that consistency that you bring to the table. You're literally at the same place at the same time every day. And that speaks a lot because sometimes you want some level of predictability from your leader, even though you want to be somebody that maybe pushes the boundaries, tries new things. At the same time, that all has to be rooted in stability of vision, stability of access, stability of culture. Talk more about how you think about portraying that vulnerability, portraying that humanity as a leader.
Everyone is doing their best. Everyone is working as hard as they can. A parent said to my staff years ago about her child, she said, he is my best. And wanting us to remember about her student who could sometimes be resistant, that was her best work. And I think it's really easy for people to get very frustrated with each other or frustrated with the system. I hope people don't get frustrated with the young people. They're acting exactly how they should be acting in their adolescent brains and minds, but in those ways to remember that everyone is really doing their best, or maybe they're doing their best that day, that my best on one day may not be my best on another day because we're all bringing in with us different things every day because we're not just at school our entire day. We're with our families, we're spending time alone, we're grabbing a phone call that maybe we shouldn't have grabbed or maybe that we had to grab, and that's going to impact how we go into the next space. I think it's important to be vulnerable, to be able to name that and to be able to share. Here's why I believe that. I believe that because this is how I went through schools. And then for someone to challenge that, for someone to say, well, in the skin that you wear, that's not the experience of this particular child. Or I graduated in the early 90s from high school, it's certainly not the sophistication of students right now. So whether it is our gender or age or ethnicity or sexual identity that needs to be brought out in an act of vulnerability or checked in an act of someone, maybe you're not seeing the whole broader picture of the situation, and that our spaces and our people need to feel safe enough to show up in ways that bring their true selves to the community that we spend so much time in.
It makes a lot of sense. And now that we're at this time of the school year and you're thinking about what's next for Branham High, right? Is there anything that you feel is something that you're already thinking about, that you've communicated about for the next school year, where you think would make an impact to the way the school is run, to the way that the students will experience school?
Oh, yeah, we're so excited. I feel like we're just getting going and gonna continue to turn chapters of this book that's ongoing. There's a lot of history here. We've got teachers that have been here over 20 years, and then we're creating a space where you're gonna have teachers in their first year of teaching. We're getting a new paint job this summer. We had a bond passed in the city that is going to allow us to do a lot of structural changes over the years. And I think that with that, we get a new canvas to paint on to continue to make this space look more welcoming and warm and have it represent the amazing student diversity that's here. One of my friends and mentors commented that it looked like a bank in our front office when we started this school year. There were no photos of students. The people at the front had these large screens that were blocking them. So we knocked those down in about October, and we're still figuring out what is the redesign to make sure that when folks come in, they see themselves and they see their kids and they see the mantras and the outcomes that guide our work and that we want to guide the students through their day. So some of that is very cosmetic, but I do think that the aesthetics of a space are so very important to the culture and the warmth that we want to have in a school space. We have new classes that are going to be started next year. My role as a leader in my first year was to do a lot of listening and not to be reluctant to take action, because the urgency of the work and the responsibility of a leader is not to just listen for a year. You want to listen more. We always want to listen more, but you still need to respond, react, and of course, communicate. Refining the vision here of having a large professional learning community, that our whole community is a professional learning community. And then in our smaller department groups, those are smaller PLCs where folks are focused on learning, focused on being really clear about the content that we want students to learn, which I think teachers are really clear about the content, but also the ways of being of the students, as well as being really thoughtful about what we're going to do when we notice that kids are having a hard time showing up and being their best selves and showing their greatness in all the spaces that we share with them.
That sounds exciting times for Branham High. One final question for you is, if you were talking to a group of your peers and you had to share like one nugget of your experience and what you've learned about driving change and communicating about change in a large school like yours, what would that nugget be?
I think the nugget is to really lean into our work as professionals, to stay in tune with what's happening in the world of education and in our communities. I wouldn't go to a doctor or practitioner in some ways, knowing that they hadn't read or listened to anything that was modern in terms of feeding their excellence in their craft. And that as educators and as leaders, our craft is centered on the student experience, but as administrators, also really centered on the experience of our staff. So I'm always curious about what people are listening to and what people are reading to know what's fueling them and what they're critical of. I say this to my son when he is on the soccer field, and I think it applies to this as well, is to like stay hungry for what is possible and what are the elements that can feed us to be greater so that we have a greater impact on the young people that we serve. Our vulnerability comes across in the ways that we communicate. And another aspect that I've grown in as a leader and that I've taken from my work in a smaller setting to every school that I've been in, and most recently at Branham, is having really consistent messaging to my staff. At leadership, I did a Monday miscellany and minutia. So it was every Monday what was going on for the week and also celebrating what happened the week before. I worked on the east side at Luis Valdez Leadership Academy, and I did a Friday email looking back on the week and previewing, and would always insert a song or a video that connected to the work of the week. The reason why I decided to start inputting that is because when I was in a new community, people didn't know me. So they didn't know how much I loved music, or they didn't know what was inspiring me. So that was one way where I got to routinely make myself vulnerable of sharing aspects of my identity that maybe I hadn't in another way, but also drive others to be inspired. Last year, I was challenged to write a daily email and worked on that with an administrator. I worked with Reggie and Ronnie Richardson, and in the beginning of the school year, Dr. Reggie and I decided to write a daily email, which was exhausting, but was celebrating what happened the day before. It was previewing what was going to happen that day and included photos. People would send me photos. Hey, could you put this out in your message? And I'm blanking on what the kitschy name of it was. And then this year I have the bear in mind. So on Friday, I send out a message. Sometimes it comes Saturday mornings about, again, what's happening and infusing in it little pieces of my personality and what matters to me so that folks get to know me better in such a large place so that when we're having the hard conversations, there's a little bit more depth to the relationship. And in that ways, I think the vulnerability of the leader is important to figure out how to model that, because that is the huge role that we're doing as teachers and administrators. We're constantly modeling. We're modeling to each other how we want to show up in the community, how we want to treat each other, and that the students are also watching that and seeing how we act toward each other.
I love that. So it sounds like there are really two aspects to driving the kind of change that you need to drive. Like one of them is just staying hungry for what's possible. So looking ahead and consuming what you can to understand what can take your team to the next level, what can take the people that you're serving to the next level, and to be able to enable that change, to model just what it's like to be human, to be vulnerable, sharing your aspects of your identity and personality, and not be afraid of that in your leadership communications, so that you're also inspiring others to be open to share their humanity too. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being so generous in sharing your experiences and your insights with us, Beth. And for all of you listening, thank you for listening. And I hope you took a nugget or three away from this episode. Until next time, I've been your host, CT, signing off. And that's all for the Engaging Leadership Show today. If these stories resonated with you at all, head over to engagingleadershipshow.com, all one word, where you can subscribe for free to receive more leadership stories and strategies every week. Also, at that link, you can access the archive of all the featured episodes we published in summary form. It's a veritable treasure trove of educational leadership wisdom distilled for your learning pleasure. Once again, the link is engagingleadershipshow.com. Sign up today to receive the next summary this very week. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and passion, and I'll see you in the next episode.